What is happening, YouTube? Welcome back, everyone, to another episode on Nightcrawler TV. I hope you're all doing very well. Today, we're going to talk about the Wild West shooting at Salford's Brass Handles pub that happened in 2006. It was a shooting that sent absolute shockwaves through the criminal underworld at the time. The impacts of the horrific shooting left two would-be assassins dead, and is still being felt more than, almost 20 years later. It is still very much talked about and is the stuff of legend throughout Manchester. So let's delve right into a story that takes us to the heart of Salford. So let's begin. Like I said, almost 20 years ago, a Wild West style shootout at Salford's Brass Handles pub, which left two would-be assassins dead, sent shockwaves through Greater Manchester's criminal fraternity. Like I said, which is still being felt today. It was a big incident, which got a lot of coverage, attracted a lot of attention, and is still talked about very much today amongst people from the area and who are connected to the Gangland of Manchester. Two young gang members from Moss Side, Colton Alvaranga, 20 years old, and Richard Austin, just 19 years old, were the hired guns who had been sent, forced. They were more forced into this situation, which we'll go more into later on as the story unfolds. But yeah, these two young lads, Colton Alvaranga and Richard Austin, they were sent on this day into one of the city's toughest pubs, the Brass Handles, to shoot dead a young upstart wannabe gangster that these lads didn't even know. They were given this murder contract. They were told to turn up to this pub and shoot this certain individual whose name they were given. Moments after the two lads burst into the pub firing shots, where regulars were watching Manchester United beating Newcastle on a busy Sunday lunchtime on March the 12th, 2006. The two lads, the two would-be hitmen, they were overpowered by revellers, disarmed, and then shot dead with their own guns. Fatally injured, both lads staggered out of the pub onto a grassy verge just beside Fitzwarren Street, just outside the pub, where they then both collapsed and died. In a trademark Salford Gangland move following any crime inside the pub, someone ripped out the CCTV system, and the word went out, "This is Salford and no one speaks to the law." No one inside the pub that day, and there were hundreds of people, would speak to the police. To this day, no one has ever been brought to justice for the killing of Alvaranga and Austin, who were believed to be in the debt of the Moss Side gang boss who organised the hit. That man, the Moss Side gang boss, was Ian McLeod, a founder member of the notorious Doddington crew who had sent these two young men to what turned out to be their own deaths. McLeod had parked up close to the pub in his Ford Mondeo. As his hired guns lay mortally wounded, his mind was still on the intended targets. He was heard to shout out, "Are they dead yet?" He walked onto the grass to check his charges were dead before calmly driving away. At first, detectives thought the shooting was the result of a feud between rival gangs in Salford and Moss Side. Over the weeks and months of the subsequent police investigation, seasoned detectives were shocked when they uncovered the truth. This crime was made in Salford, despite it appearing to be otherwise. McLeod was then 43 and all but retired from serious crime, but still regarded as the leader of the Doddington gang. He had himself been hired by one of Salford's most notorious figures, Bobby Spears, a close friend of the city's Mr. Big, Paul Massey, who would himself be shot dead years later. Spears is said to have paid McLeod £10,000 for the hit. Not that the young men who were to carry out the dirty work were going to see any of that money. At the moment, Alvaranga and Austin were walking into the Brass Handles. Spears was enjoying a half-time pint in an executive box at Old Trafford, where he was watching his beloved United beating Newcastle 2-0 that day. It was, he must have thought, the perfect alibi for the perfect crime. But the mission failed, and Spears fled to Benidorm in Spain, believing he would never be unmasked as the man who had ordered the hit. The man he wanted dead was Salford hardman David Totten, whose burgeoning criminal reputation and liking for violence demanded attention from his rivals. Spears wanted Totten dead, but why? Neither man has ever gone public to explain their feud. Now, what I've always been told about the feud between Bobby Spears and David Totten was that it was personal. It was something ridiculous, it was tit for tat. But, in that sort of world between gangsters, ego is a big thing, innit? So basically, in the weeks and months before the shooting, Totten was refused entry to a Manchester nightclub, and he told the bouncers he was a friend of Bobby Spears, who was already inside. The doorman fetched the older man to the entrance, and even though he knew perfectly well who Totten was, Spears feigned ignorance. The doorman sent humiliated Totten on his way. It's unclear whether this was meant simply as a laddish joke, a bit of banter, or something designed deliberately to belittle Totten. Whatever the intention, in the subsequent weeks, David Totten suddenly started drinking in Bobby Spears' local, the Brass Handles. Was this designed to spook Bobby Spears? If that was the case, it worked. Spears was worried, and he quietly set about a plot to assassinate David Totten. So, the plot was hatched. 2 young lads from Moss Side would be sent into a pub in the city of Salford's heartland to kill David Totten as he watched the match. Police would believe it was a feud between rivals in Moss Side and Salford, and Bobby Spears would go under the radar. That was the plan. They were to be ounced by a spotter who was placed inside the pub at the time, convicted gunrunner Connie Howarth. She sent discreet messages from inside the Brass Handles to tell MacLeod where Totten was sitting with his mates in the snooker room, information he could then pass on to his very reluctant hitmen. She was sitting at the bar, mobile phone in hand, and had a perfect view across the bar to the snooker room where Totten was sitting with all his mates. It seems the hired would-be assassins were reluctant. Evidence suggested MacLeod had to force the young men from his car so they could go and complete their mission. Detectives believed at the time that Austin and Alvarenga were only in the car because of a debt they owed MacLeod. The young men weren't believed to be there to make a pile of cash, but simply to get mob boss MacLeod off their backs. When they entered the pub, they fired 6 times into Totten's chest before Austin's gun misfired, and they were eventually overpowered by other drinkers. Totten, who was with a group of friends, was seriously hurt, but incredibly survived. Another man, not believed to be a target, Aaron Travers, was also hit, jumping up and taking 2 bullets meant for his friend Totten. The table at which Totten and his friends had been sitting drinking was upended and used as a shield against the Doddington gang members who had run into the pub and opened fire. Totten and Travers were then driven away and dumped outside a hospital, where they were treated and would eventually make full recoveries despite very serious injuries. Neither men would make a formal statement to the police about being shot, and nor would anyone else who was in the pub that afternoon. This was Salford's omerta at work, the almost impenetrable code of silence which protects the city's criminals from prosecution. So that means that almost 20 years after Austin and Alvarenga were shot dead at the Brass Handles, no one, to this very day, has ever been charged over their killings. For many outside the Greater Manchester's criminal fraternity, their loss isn't mourned. After all, let's face it, they were there about to murder someone else in cold blood before they were themselves disarmed and shot dead. But to their grieving families, of course, it was very different. Austin's mother, Bridget, had moved the family to Wythenshawe to want her son to escape the clutches of the gangs, but obviously to no avail. I worried every time Richard would come home, as he was probably in Moss Side. I had no idea who he was with, she told police. The last time she saw her son, he was asleep on the sofa of her flat after half a bottle of red wine. She left the house and never saw him again. Alvarenga's mother, Linda Connolly, saw him the day before the shooting, making some lunch for him before he went off to a party. Alvarenga had been released from a 4-year sentence in 2005, but even before he was out, MacLeod was trying to visit him to ask him about doing security work. If he wanted to go straight, MacLeod clearly had other ideas. The shooting and its main protagonists have helped to shape the criminal landscape that exists in Greater Manchester still today. The target of the hit, David Totten, went on to become one of the most feared men in Salford, someone who has had repeated run-ins with the police. The law did eventually catch up with McLeod and Spears, but no thanks to anyone inside the brass handles that day. The central plank of the prosecution case, which eventually saw them convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, wasn't any witnesses, but evidence about their telephone communications before and after the botched hit. All police had when they arrived at the scene were 2 dead bodies and 2 mobile phones on the grass beside them. From this uncompromising beginning, a case evolved. The phones were key. There were pay-as-you-go mobiles, which can frequently lead detectives nowhere, but officers realised one of them had been topped up with the help of a loyalty card with a name on it. From there, police were able to trace other mobile numbers and retrace an incriminating web of communications behind the main players in the plot. The following year, Howarth was jailed for a minimum of 20 years, while McLeod was handed a minimum of 21 years as part of their life sentences. It was a major coup for Greater Manchester Police, which had routinely struggled to penetrate Salford's criminal underworld. Meanwhile, Bobby Spears was living the high life and enjoying the sunshine in Benidorm. He went to watch his beloved United whenever he could, and when he did, police always kept an eye on him, but could do nothing, for the time being at least anyway. Spears had been instrumental in planning the operation and kept in touch with McLeod and Howarth on his mobile from his executive box at Old Trafford that day. Communication police would later uncover all of this, unmasking him as the man who had ordered the botched hit. Finally, he was extradited back to the UK after a European arrest warrant was issued, and he was jailed for a minimum of 23 years in 2009. His close friend Paul Massey, the man regarded as Salford's Mr. Big, who was himself shot dead in 2015, was pictured spray painting "Free Bobby Spears" on the walls beside Salford Lads Club in the wake of the sentencing of his mate. For a period in 2009, police investigating Astin and Alvarenga's deaths were keen to speak to a suspected robber who had been in the brass handles that day before going on the run, but nothing has ever come from that line of inquiry. David Totten may have survived the shooting, but he has continued to have run-ins with Greater Manchester Police. Police did not believe he was the man who shot dead Austin and Alvarenga, but he certainly didn't tell police who did. In 2011, he was handed 20 months behind bars after he admitted conspiracy to handling stolen goods. Before that, he served a long prison sentence for beating up 2 car park attendants. His computer log at GMP has a firearms marker on it by virtue of surviving the brass handle shooting. On March the 3rd, 2012, he was in the middle of another shooting, and this time it was the police doing the firing. He was sitting in the front passenger seat of a stolen red Audi A6 estate, parked in Culcheth in Cheshire, when armed police swooped and shot dead the driver, his friend, Anthony Granger. Again, Totten survived. A public inquiry later heard Totten had been gloved and wearing a rolled-up balaclava on his head. In the back of the car was Joey Travers, the brother of the man who had taken a couple of bullets for Totten, Aaron Travers, at the brass handles. At the public inquiry into the death of Anthony Granger earlier that year, Totten denied he was about to commit a robbery at a nearby supermarket and claimed they were there simply to collect a debt off a man called Fenton. He and many others were defined by that shooting at the brass handles in 2006 and the subsequent police investigation. It was a remarkable case, and hopefully we won't go back to those bad times ever again. They were just young lads really. It was such a tragedy, recalled Andy Tattersall, the now retired detective superintendent who led the original inquiry. Today, the file remains open on the murders of Colton Alvarenga and Richard Austin. Just don't expect anyone in Salford to tell you about it. So, there you have it guys. That is the story of the infamous shooting at the Brass Handles pub in Salford in 2006. A story that resulted in the unfortunate deaths of 2 young lads, as well as the jailing of Doddington gang leader Ian McLeod, and also the jailing of Salford gangster Bobby Spears. So, this incident did have a lot of repercussions for a lot of people. There was a massive ripple effect felt from this throughout Manchester's gangland scene. Certainly a crazy story indeed, guys. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the latest episode on Nightcrawler TV. Drop us a like, drop us a comment. Let's get a bit of a discussion going about this particular episode. As always, guys, take care, be safe out there, and I will see you all very soon for another episode on Nightcrawler TV. God bless, guys. All the best.